Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at a couple of really foundational stories from our source material.
Right. We're going into the Tower of Babel account and then that genealogy part.
Exactly, the one that eventually brings us to Abram. So it's kind of a journey from this like huge global event.
Down to a specific family history.
Yeah. Our mission really is just to unpack how the source presents these events, the sequence and maybe any connections.
Precisely. We have humanity, one language, big project, big consequences.
And then boom, the focus narrows right down to this lineage.
Setting the stage for what comes next.
Okay, let's dive straight into the Tower of Babel then. The text tells us humanity moves eastward, settles on the plain of Shinar.
Shinar, yeah. That puts us squarely in ancient Mesopotamia, a significant location historically.
Definitely. And at this point, it says everyone's speaking the same language, common speech.
Which seems to be the enabling factor for what they do next.
Which is, well, it's massive, isn't it? They decide to build a city and a tower, not just any tower, but one that reaches to the heavens.
The ambition is just staggering.
So what's driving them? Why this huge project?
Well, the text is pretty clear. Two main things. First, make a name for themselves.
Okay, fame, recognition, still relatable.
Very much so. And second, crucially, to avoid being scattered over the face of the whole earth.
Ah, so there's a fear there, fear of dispersal.
Seems like a key motivation, yes. Unity against scattering.
And the details about construction using bricks, not stone, and tar for mortar, it gives a real sense of place, doesn't it?
It does. Resourceful. Using what was available on that plane shows some technological awareness.
But then comes the divine perspective. The Lord came down to see it all.
Right. There's this moment of observation followed by, well, concern, it seems.
That line is striking. If, as one people speaking the same language, they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them.
It's really potent, isn't it? It speaks volumes about the perceived power of unity and maybe unchecked human potential.
Yeah, what exactly was the concern? Was it just the height of the tower? Or something deeper about that unified power?
The text doesn't explicitly say, but it implies the potential itself is the issue. So the solution presented is
Communication breakdown.
exactly confuse the language so they will not understand each other.
Which naturally would stop a massive coordinated building project right in its tracks.
Instantly. Imagine trying to build anything complex when you suddenly can't understand your coworkers.
Yeah, impossible. And the consequence is the very thing they were trying to prevent.
Scattering. So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they had to stop building.
And that's where the name comes from, Babel.
Yes, the text ties it directly. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. Confusion and scattering.
So in this narrative framework, Babel is the origin point for linguistic diversity and the global spread of peoples.
That's how it's presented, yes. A foundational explanation for that diversity.
Okay, so unified humanity, ambition, confusion, scattering. Then the source text takes a pretty sharp turn, wouldn't you say?
It does. It zooms right in. This is the account of Shem's family line, from global to hyper-specific.
It's a genealogy. Why this sudden shift to lists of names and ages?
Well, these genealogies in ancient texts often did heavy lifting. They weren't just ancestry lists. They established connections, legitimacy, lineage back to important figures.
Like connecting to Shem, Noah's son.
Exactly. And this particular one is clearly leading somewhere specific. It's paving the way for Abram.
Let's look at some of these figures. Shem himself, 100 years old when Arphaxad is born, 2 years after the flood, and then lives another 500 years.
Those lifespans are, well, they're immense by our standards.
What might that signify, do you think, within the story?
It could suggest perhaps a closer connection to the beginning, a different era. We do see them gradually decrease as we move down the line.
Right. Arphaxad fathers Shelah at 35, lives 403 more years. Shelah fathers Eber at 30, lives another 403 years. Eber fathers Peleg at 34, lives 430 years after that.
Steady progression there.
But that name, Peleg, it stands out. I've heard it linked to the idea of division.
That's a common understanding of the name, yes. And given the context.
Having just read about the scattering from Babel.
Right. It's hard not to notice the potential connection. The text doesn't explicitly state Peleg was born when the earth was divided, but the name itself in that sequence.
It feels like a possible echo, doesn't it? A nod back to that era of division happening around his time.
It certainly invites that interpretation. A subtle link, perhaps. The text then says Peleg fathered Ru at 30 and lived 209 years more.
And the line continues, Ru, then Sarug, then Nohor, then Terah. And those lifespans keep trending downwards.
Definitely. Nahor lived 119 years after fathering Terah. Terah himself is 70 when he fathers Abram, Nahor, and Haran.
And Terah lived to 205, dying eventually in Haran.
Mhm. And we get these little family snapshots, too, like Haran, Abram's brother, dying young in Ur while his father Terah was still alive. Lot is Haran's son.
Adds a touch of realism, maybe. Tragedy amidst these long lives.
Could be. And Abram's wife, Sarai, mentioned as childless early on. That becomes important later. Nahor marries Milcah, who is Haran's daughter, his niece.
Right, keeping track of the family structure. And then the journey. Terah packs them up.
Takes Abram, his grandson Lot, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, from Ur the Chaldeans.
Heading for Canaan, it says. But they don't make it all the way initially.
No, they stop and settle in Haran.
And that stopover in Haran is significant, isn't it? It's where Terah dies, and it becomes the jumping-off point for Abram later.
Exactly. It positions the family for the next major phase of the narrative.
So if we sort of step back and look at the sequence the source gives us.
You have the Babel story, unity, ambition, scattering, linguistic diversity,
Followed immediately by this detailed tracing of one specific line, Shem's descendants.
marked by those decreasing lifespans, maybe that name Peleg hinting at division.
Leading right up to Terah's family migrating and pausing in Haran, with Abram poised for his own story.
The connection isn't, like, explicitly argued as cause and effect, but the order is suggestive.
Yeah, the scattering from Babel creates the wider world stage, maybe, and then this family emerges onto it.
That's one way to read the flow, definitely. The time frame implied by Shem living post-flood and being Abram's ancestor provides that implicit link, too.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we've explored humanity's early unity, according to the source, their big building project at Babel.
The divine intervention leading to language confusion and global scattering.
And then we followed that genealogical thread, meticulously laid out from Shem down through all those generations,
Highlighting figures like Peleg, noting the lifespans, the family details.
culminating in Terah's family moving from Ur and settling for a time in Haran.
And it does leave you with interesting things to think about, doesn't it? How these two narratives, one macro, one micro, sit side by side.
Yeah, like, here's a question maybe for you, the listener, to ponder. How might that story of scattering, of languages being confused at Babel, resonate or connect with the later emergence of distinct peoples, distinct cultures, and specific family lines, like Abram's, as the larger narrative unfolds?
It's a relationship the text hints at through sequence rather than explanation.
Yeah.
How did that fragmentation influence what came next?
Exactly. It's something to maybe reflect on personally.
For sure. What the source does give us clearly is this foundational account of ambition, divine limits, the origin of diversity, and then the careful tracing of a lineage that's about to become very central, a rich starting point.